Welcome back to Nights with Chris Boyle. Joining us now is musician Akira the Don. He's a DJ, he's a musician, he's an artist. Take a taste of his music. It's really awesome. You're going to love it.
You ever heard Akira the Don?
He said you're going to say good. 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 Good.
Akira, dude, thank you so much for joining us. Your music is awesome. I gotta ask, what got you started making this kind of music? It's so cool, it's so unique. Words can barely even do it justice.
Thank you, brother. It's an extension of something I've been doing ever since I started making music, which is like the earliest memories I have is like 6 or 7. I used to do these experiments with like cassettes and then recording things and bits of like newsreels and stuff like that and collaging. And it's also an extension of when I was making rap music. I always really loved the skits, and a skit would be like a little intro to the song or something to set the scene or a sample of a bit of a movie or something like that. And I was like, what if like the skit was like the whole song? What if I like sampled somebody talking about something I was interested in and sort of cut that up so the rhythm was eked out, and that was the record. And it kind of developed from there.
That's super cool. So I gotta ask, when you sample these speakers, obviously you've gotten a response from some of them. Guys like Jocko, they've talked about you. You sample a lot of different people, guys like Jordan Peterson, and you've already had a huge influence in music. Actually, I hear a lot of Christian creators, a lot of like, there's Catholic dudes. I had a guy on my show, Wafers 3D, who's influenced a lot by you. He like samples like Fulton Sheen and stuff like that. So you have a huge influence. Did you set out when you did this to really create kind of a double impact with both the music and the messages that you're sort of imprinting over it?
Well, it was multiple things. One thing was that I was rapping and I was making a record, and I realized I was not yet wise enough to make the record, and that I needed to go live some more before I talked about the things I wanted to talk about. You always know if someone's speaking, particularly in rap, and it's coming from a place of inauthenticity. You can feel it, right? Rap only works when it's authentic, for me. And a lot of music, a lot of things work that way. So I kind of went away to go and experience more of life and was working on instrumental music. And then I realized, well, there's certain individuals out there who've been thinking about certain things and investigating certain things for decades. What if I just used their voice to communicate some of these things? For example, Jordan Peterson had been thinking about how it was we ended up in the kind of massacre mess of millions and millions of people dying that we did in the 20th century, right? So who better to, have discussing certain things? And then you realize with people, everybody has like a melodic and a rhythmic quality to their voice. If you pay enough attention, you can find it. And then you can make the music that works with that. And then you've got something that will drill into a person's very being the more they listen to it,
That's kind of interesting. Do you, when you create your music, so I got to be honest with you, I've always wanted to create music like this. Like, this is something before I found you, before I found music like this, it's something that I wished was out there and I just didn't have the talent to create myself. So I think it's super cool that you're doing this. I'm huge fan. I love that you're doing this. I have to ask, so when you do this structurally, because I'm not a musician, I don't know how these things work, do you create the music first, or do you take the samples and find the rhythm in their speaking and create the music around that?
It depends on the song. I do both. I make a lot of music, so I'll have a lot of music, and then sometimes I'll hear something and, that will fit with that. That's perfect. And sometimes in the case of, for example, the first single from the second Jocko album, Every Second Counts. The way he says that, every second counts. There was already, I could hear that melody. All I had to do was play that. It became din 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 din. So these things will sometimes present themselves, and sometimes there'll be some serendipitous synchronicity in something I already have that exists and works with it.
It's kind of interesting that you mentioned that they have that rhythm that you could find. Do you think that that's something that you find more with professional speakers? Like when you hear someone like Jocko speak, it's really interesting because, or even someone like Jordan Peterson or some of the others that you've sampled, it's interesting when they talk, it sounds like they're doing that. I don't know if they're doing it intentionally or if it's something that they just has found that works, but it's interesting when you couple that with the music, it creates sort of a mnemonic effect. It helps people really latch on to it and absorb that message even more.
Yeah, particularly you find a lot of them speak in, not just in rhythm, but in rhyme. I keep finding these little, particularly with someone like Jordan Peterson does this a lot. And you won't necessarily notice it when you're listening to the speech, but then I'll take a section and just loop it. You're like, oh look, he rhymed that whole thing, and it'll be quite a complex kind of rhyme pattern as well. A lot of the time. So a lot of the time I'm finding what exists and just paying attention. But literally everybody does it. People who are not trained speakers, people who are not public speakers, everybody does it. All speech has melody and rhythm inherent in it. And you got to think about like what we used to do before we had books, before the printing press. Books existed, but we kept them in our heads. And we would read them to each other around the campfires. We would perform a bit of a book, right? Which is why a lot of the older long texts tend to sort of be poems, Gilgamesh or whatever it is, right? Homer, whatever it is. They'll be like epic poems, so they'll have some rhythm and maybe some rhyme baked into them already, so it's easier for people to remember them. That's how people would remember all these books. People used to be able to sit there and speak a whole book. They would have it in them. And the way they would have it in them is through the melody and the rhythm inherent in it, which allowed them to memorize it. As you mentioned previously, this goes back to nursery rhymes and how we learn things at that stage of life. You put rhyme and rhythm in something, you can remember it.
I think that's really interesting because to me it seems like your music does three things simultaneously. It can introduce people to some of these speakers if they'd never heard of them before. Some of them are very famous though, people like Jordan Peterson, people like Jocko Willink, but for people who have heard them, then it kind of reinforces those messages. And then again, the music seems to act as a mnemonic device, right? It kind of drills it in like a nursery rhyme, like you said, going back to these poems of the ancient days. But it's interesting you point out that even when regular people who aren't, professional speakers talk, it's something that we carry in us, right? A poet and you didn't even know it. I want to ask you a little bit about how you find these speakers and the kind of messages that you're trying to focus in on. We're going to have to take a super quick break though. Folks at home, you're not going to want to miss this. We'll be back in just 2 quick minutes. Sit tight. Welcome back to Nights with Chris Boyle. Joining us once again is DJ musician Akira the Don. So Akira, before the break we were talking a little bit about how coupling important messages, impactful messages with music can not only help spread those messages, but also help people remember them, quite frankly, going back to, the ancient days when we used poems to communicate stories. I have to ask though, so how do you find these stories? So just the first time I heard your music wasn't surfing around on YouTube. It was actually on Twitter through a meme. And it seems like your music's become super popular through the internet. It was the one, I forget who originally did the speech, but it's a very famous speech where someone's talking about, if I were Satan, this is what I would do. I would, pollute television, do all these different things. And it's, it's very in line with what we're seeing today. And I've actually seen it a ton of times. Maybe folks at home have actually heard your remix of that song, your sampling of that speech in a song, because I see it all the time in memes, and usually it's put over, visual images of exactly what's being talked about. But it's, again, that's something that's been really impactful, and I think that sampled song brought a lot of attention back onto that speech. So I have to ask, how do you hunt down these messages? How do you find the speakers, the messages, and select which ones you're going to incorporate into your music?
Well, that was Paul Harvey, and, Paul Harvey is a legend in American broadcasting, and a very prescient and wise fellow. And yeah, his "If I Were the Devil, What I Would Do" is obviously very relevant to this moment. With regards to how I find things, I remember Peterson spoke once about when he was reading the Bible, and he would be pondering a thing, and he wouldn't necessarily understand it, but something would stand out to him, something would glitter, and he would look into that thing. He would know that was the place for him to go. And it's pretty much that. Things glitter. Sometimes I'll be listening to a podcast and something will glitter and I'll know that that's a song. Sometimes it'll be a lecture. Sometimes it'll be a bit of a book. I've turned things like Marcus Aurelius' meditations into albums, for example. But really, it's been a case of me wanting to brainwash myself into being the ultimate version of myself. Kind of in that Matrix-esque "now I know Kung Fu" thing, where Neo sort of downloads various things, right? There's been lots of things that I wanted to teach myself. For one point, I had to rid myself of this socialist programming I'd gotten from my wonderful parents and the music they used to listen to, and so on and so forth, that was giving me disastrous relationships with money and making it sort of difficult for me to be the patriarch I needed to be within my own family. So initially, I was sort of brainwashing myself out of some negative mindset I had. So I was like, right, I want to I want to listen to this thing. And, people write to me about this all the time. They say, there's a lecture. I could listen to that lecture once or twice, and then that podcast once or twice, and you go, oh, yeah, that's really cool. That's really great. I want to. But unless you immediately integrate the lesson into your life, a lot of times you'll forget it. And then you'll hear someone else say it on a podcast, go, oh, yeah, that's great. But unless you immediately integrate it into your life, you'll forget it. But if you put it into a song that is catchy and you want to listen to, you can listen to that over and over and over for years until the thing actually goes in. I have people write to me quite a lot. Saying, I've been listening to this one record of yours for like 4 years, 5 years, and I've just worked out what it means. And I've just been able to apply it, and now my life is better, or so on and so forth.
It's interesting that you talk about the music that we listen to when we're kids, because a lot of the music that I like, I'll go back and listen to the music, the lyrics critically as an adult, and I mean a lot of it, especially the stuff that kind of came out of the sexual revolution, like a lot of it's not good, like it's immoral music. Even the stuff that sounds cool, you break down the lyrics, like, oh, this is terrible, and then you look into the lives of the dudes, it's like, oh man, this is really bad. And what's crazy too is that I remember lyrics from when I was a kid, like listening to music. I still remember those lyrics. Most terribly, I remember, I hate to even admit it, I remember lyrics to commercial jingles, like advertising jingles that I heard from when I was a kid. Like, I forget, one from a commercial, like $9.99, I don't even want to say it aloud, it's terrible. But that's the reality. I mean, that's the actual staying power of these things. So I think it's super cool. Number one, that you're doing this, and number two, that you're doing it in a way where you're creating something that you want to see, that you enjoy. I think the best art often is created in a place where the artist themselves is appreciating it, rather than like, oh, what is my audience going to like? What are they going to appreciate? What are they going to enjoy? This is something, I don't know if I'd consider myself an artist hosting a show like this, but it's something I do have to take into consideration. So I think it's super cool that that's the approach you're taking. What do you have planned up next? What's your next big project? And don't forget to tell folks at home where they can find you. I want everyone to go follow Akira the Don.
Well, one, you're right about that, and it's not just artists. I mean, all an artist is somebody who makes decisions. And your life could be a masterpiece if you lived your life in such a manner that you were consciously making decisions. In the way an artist goes, this brushstroke goes here, that snare drum goes there, or whatever, right? That's all you're doing in anything. And if you wish for something to exist in the world, and there's a way you could make it exist, do it. And that's a great business plan. That's how brilliant things are invented. You wish a thing existed, it doesn't exist. Find out a way to make it exist. There's your product. So yes, and you're obviously doing it, particularly your tie. That is an artwork in itself. The positioning, the whole thing is incredible. As far as what I got coming up, I got a record called The Strangest Secret in the World, incorporating the great Earl Nightingale, coming up very shortly. And I have Meditations Volume 2, the long-awaited sequel to the first Marcus Aurelius album. So this takes the thousands of years old writings of Marcus Aurelius and turns them into epic records that you can listen to and enjoy, and thus imbue the immortal wisdom of the immortal Marcus Aurelius, who amusingly writes in some of the things that I've turned into songs in that book that, every person will be forgotten within a generation or two. And that you should therefore just live your life with that in mind. But it's funny because we haven't forgotten him or his words.
Awesome stuff. I won't forget to check that album out. Akira, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you.
And that's all we have for you this evening. Until next time, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at HeyChrisBoyle. If you like the show, please send feedback to chris.boyle@OANN.com. I'd like to thank my production team, my director Jared, my editor Raphael, associate producer Riley, PA Brittany, and all of you at home. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your night.